every one of you for joining this special session from the RISE, and also, of course, thanking the two moderators, Jim and Daniel, for joining today. Helping us to answer some questions regarding the MICCAI submission. I think this is excellent, as I'm sure many of you, especially the ones that maybe submit the first time or one of the first times, have some questions. So I think this is great that we can have first-hand knowledge from them, and that could help throughout the submission process. But before starting the session, I just wanted to give a very brief introduction about the RISE for those that never heard about. So the RISE is a interest group in the MICCAI Society, which stands for Reinforcement, Inclusiveness and Diversity, and Empower Minority Researchers and Low Middle Income Country. So how it started the RISE was a couple of years ago. We saw that there was very little submissions into the MICCAI from LMIC countries, and we wanted to boost this. So for that, what we try to do throughout the year is to organize different events, as well as some events during MICCAI, with the idea to propel inclusiveness as well as geographic diversity within the MICCAI Society, as well as try to empower the researchers from these countries, and and also to create a very strong network between different countries. And with all of this, of course, is in order to reduce disparity in medical imaging as well as worldwide in the area of we're working, of course, of medical imaging analysis. So for that, where we are locating, most of the people who are part of the RISE community is from, as I was mentioning before, LMSC students, as well as academics and industry that work on the area of medical imaging computing, as well as computer aid interventions. So since we started, we have expanded quite a lot our network, and currently we have more than 600 members. And here you can see a little bit of the distribution of people who are part of this this part of this group. And of course, I wanted to say, I will share it later, but there's a QR code in case that you are not part of it and you are interested. And as I mentioned, I'm going to show you that we do some events throughout the year that you would like to attend. So with that, I also want to present the new RISE board. So this was just started in January 2025. So we have few new people who have joined, as well as few new activities that we are going to be doing throughout the year. For instance, as a main novelty, we are going to have monthly tutorials. So we're going to try to cover from the basics to more advanced topics on the area of AI. And this will be led by Rashid, which is our new tutorial coordinator. Also, as part of this session, we have a journal club that runs bi-weekly, which is led by Alvaro and Pulkit, and they will talk later more about this initiative. So just to give you a little bit of a brief recap of some of the activities that we have organized since we started in 2022. We had a winter school where you can see here we have covered more of the basics in the area of AI, from an intro, then image segmentation, as well image registration. This was a huge success, and it was a mix between tutorials as well as lab sessions. As you can see here, some of the notebooks are like screenshots. Then we did the second session. This one was a summer school that was in collaboration with the FAMI group, where we had mainly covered two topics, fair AI as well as federated learning. And also for the first time, we have a Kaggle competition. This was very exciting. We have great participation all around the world. And we are also aiming to organize a summer school this year. So please keep up. If you join, as I was saying before, our newsletter, you will have all the information when we spread more widely this new event that we are planning. Also, throughout the last 3 years in MICCAI, we have organized a lunch event with excellent keynote speakers as Professor Purag Ablomusi and Dr. Gadas Smith. This was 2 years ago. And last year, Professor Nasri Damab. And all of them has had a mix between explaining their personal experience, how they have grown from early career up to where they are now, most of them being professors, as well a little bit about their work, what they do. So with that, as I mentioned before, some of the initiatives that we started last year was the Journal Club. And this is a bi-weekly event where we pick one paper and we discuss it in depth. And this is a very great, I think, initiative, and it's a very open, and we try to make it as friendly as possible. And in many cases, it's the same author who is presenting the paper, so you can also get more kind of first-hand answers if you have any questions. And also, we try not to only talk about the paper itself, but we also try sometimes to go a little bit beyond and talk about what it makes like a good paper and trying to give tips on how you write a good paper, how you revise a good paper. So if it's something of interest, you can scan here the QR code, and this you can join the newsletter. So with that, I would like to pass to Pulkit, who is gonna maybe give you a little bit more information about the Journal Club, as he is now one of the coordinator.
Hi, could you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Hi everyone, I'm Pulkit. Thanks Esther for a lot for the lovely introduction and the overview. So together with Alvaro and this year, I'll be acting as the Journal Club coordinator. And as Esther already mentioned, our aim is for postdocs and graduate students and also early career researchers to present their own work or any other paper that they love within biomedical image analysis, focusing on either methodological developments or clinical translation. And the main idea here is that we can have in-depth discussion around the paper, which would lead to exchange of ideas and hopefully have a stronger scientific community through interesting collaborations. So we typically meet twice a month on either Wednesdays and Saturdays, depending upon the schedule. And it usually lasts around 1.5 hours. We will have a first session from March 8th onwards and 2 weeks in rotation from that point onwards. If you would like to present in any of these sessions, you can simply scan this QR code, or I will put a subscription link where you can sign up in the chat as well. Now, to start this year off, we decided to do something special. And since MICCAI is coming up, we thought that we could have a Q&A session with one of the two, with two program chairs. And Professor Jim G and Daniel Alexander were very generous to act as panelists today and lead this informal discussion about any questions that you may have regarding the submission process, the review, or the rebuttal. So the format of this particular session is basically I've created a couple of slides detailing these three processes. And if you want to ask any other questions, you can just put them in the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat so we can take questions directly. But just let me give a brief introduction, a brief bio of our two panelists today. So Dr. Jim G is currently a professor in the Department of Radiology at the University of Pennsylvania, where he directs the Penn Image Computing and Science Laboratory, co-directs the Translational Biomedical Image Center, and also directs the Interfaces program in biomedical imaging. Last year, Professor G was awarded the title of MICCAI Fellow for pioneering the development and open source distribution of computational methods in medical imaging science. He obtained his bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering computer science from the University of Washington and earned his doctorate in computer science from University of Pennsylvania. Our second speaker today is Dr. Daniel Alexander, who is a professor at University College London and also the department head of computer science. Previously, he was the director of Center for Medical Image Computing, where he led the Microstructure Imaging Group and Progression of Neurodegenerative Diseases Initiative. Professor Alexander completed his BA in mathematics from Oxford. He then studied his master's and PhD in computer science at UCL. After a brief postdoc at UPenn, he returned to UCL as a lecturer and has been a professor there ever since. Um, so, Chairman Daniel, I'll just open the floor to you. And as I said, I have a couple of slides prepared with questions. So I can read maybe the first couple of questions and then you can just take over and have a discussion. So the first set of questions, as I said, relates to the submission process, in particular validation and benchmarking. So one of the questions that we got was important qualities. What are the important qualities that differentiate high impact papers at MICCAI? Are there any particular evaluation criteria that reviewers emphasize, such as novelty, clinical relevancy, producibility? How does MICCAI balance technical innovation with practical applicability in healthcare? And are there any common pitfalls that authors should avoid? The floor is yours.
Thanks, Pulkit. First of all, I just want to welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join this webinar. I also want to thank Esther and Pulkit as part of the RISE board in inviting Danny and me to join you on this occasion. We're really honored to do so and looking forward to hopefully being helpful to your submissions to MICCAI in South Korea this year. Danny, did you want to take this question? This is a great general question to open the session.
Yeah,
Add a few thoughts.
Okay. And that just first of all, thanks from me as well to Pulkit and Esther and the whole RISE board and all of you for joining us. Yeah, really nice to be here today. Important qualities that differentiate high impact papers at MICCAI. So maybe let's start with that kind of basic question. I think for me, it's kind of the same formula for any conference journal paper, really, isn't it? The big papers, in my mind, are always the ones that combine methodological novelty with new capability or discovery. And I think, those are the ones that really stand out from the crowd. Very often you see a paper that, has got some interesting methodological novelty, and then there's a bunch of experiments and things that might show incremental improvements over some other things, but it doesn't blow you away in terms of being able to do something new or reveal some new knowledge. And, on the flip side, sometimes you see papers submitted to MICCAI where, the methodological innovation is, fairly small. It's really building on existing ideas, but actually it does show some quite interesting new, clinical insight or capability or whatever. But the really big ones, I think, that stand out and tend to hit the podium are the ones where you have both of those things, some cool new methodological idea, and, it really showcases some new nice capability. Not that every single paper that gets into MICCAI, meets that high bar. And, I wouldn't put you off submitting if you don't have that sort of perfect alignment of planets. I think a lot of the papers that get in and that people find interesting, are just, some interesting methodological advance that shows promising results, or a, simple application of something that, suggests a new capability. But yeah, since you're asking what differentiates the high impact ones, I would say it's that combination of things. So no, Jim, if you want to.
Yeah, no, thanks, Danny. So this is a great question. These conferences. So first, I just want to echo Danny's point that there's nothing special about MICCAI. This is basically the attitude you should take regardless of the forum, whether it's MICCAI, whether it's another conference, a journal paper, or any other forum in which new scientific content is being presented. Yes, just about any forum would request high impact, clinically or technically significant work to be presented, and so on and so forth. The other point I want to echo that Danny raised is that the bar is often set very high in terms of publicizing meetings and journals and so on and so forth. But I'd remind folk to try to just be mindful. In the way I kind of approach this is just ask yourself the question, why would somebody care about the work that I'm doing? And I think it's okay for me if there's only 10 people who care about what I work on, and it doesn't need to be a piece of work that thousands of people care about. I think fundamentally you should ask yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? What is it contributing? What question am I answering? What value am I adding to the community, or to the sub-community or tiny subgroup that I'm working on? And that's the most important thing. It's at the end of the day, there's a question here about criteria. I think significance is really the most important thing, and significance can come from methodology, can come from that application, and ultimately it comes from the question that you're addressing. I love the fact that we're talking to the RISE community, and there are issues that are special to the RISE community that may be less evident to sort of the larger MICCAI community that tends to be coming from high resource environments. And so don't be put off by the fact that that we have these superlatives in our publicity materials and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, just know that what you're doing is important, and articulate that significance and that importance. And that's really the most important thing. It doesn't have to be a new algorithm. It doesn't have to be, something that nobody's ever heard of before. If you've got a great idea that solves a real problem, at the end of the day, that's stuff that every forum would be interested in. Okay?
Yeah, and actually maybe I can pick up on that again. I was continuing to unpick this question and moving on to the last two sort of questions in that bullet point. How does MICCAI balance technical innovation with practical applicability and common pitfalls? So the former, I think it's fair to say probably that MICCAI is more leaning towards technical innovation, and it's less about sort of deployment of things into healthcare scenarios. Not that that's not of interest, but it is a computer science conference at heart. But even if you have a technical innovation, I think talking a bit about that practical, applicability, and even if it's a very early stage thing, having some thoughts in there somewhere about how that method might ultimately be deployed and make impact in a healthcare setting is important to have in there somewhere. And I think that links to the common pitfall, which comes back to what Jim said, is precisely not doing that. I think the common thing that you do see with MICCAI submissions often is, people go into great detail about technical innovation and design of an algorithm, but forget to put due attention into exactly, what is the significance of this? Why should someone care about all of this innovation? What impact is it going to have on someone's life somewhere? So I think it's really important to take the time to think about those things and really explain it nicely up front in the paper. And again, at the end, make sure that there's a nice, safe space for a good conclusion and discussion section that really thinks about, what is the future of this method? What's the impact going to be? Remind the reader about that stuff. And as Jim says, I think the RISE community is in a great position to do that in quite a compelling and compelling ways that people haven't maybe come across quite so commonly in the MICCAI community.
And just one last point to add with that, this rationale, justification, motivation is actually compelling not just for MICCAI. It's actually compelling for any conference that you submit. So if it's CVPR, if it's another sort of like application domain agnostic meeting, the fact that your work has impact, beyond the specific methodological or technical applications that you're working on, is really, really compelling to the community in general. All right, great. What do we have next, Pulkit?
So let's see. maybe the next question we can take is about paper novelty, the third last one. Many works can be considered similar to other works, but for a different application or with some small incremental value. What is the necessary novelty to increase paper acceptance? So I guess this is a question between what considers to be a novel idea versus what is considered an incremental paper. And there can be good papers with a lot of thorough benchmarking versus there are papers with extremely new ideas, especially those math-heavy papers, but with little to validate their methods on. So what would be the criteria of writing those papers up, and how would reviewers see that?
Yeah, okay. So Danny, I'll just comment
Go ahead.
quickly this, and then I'll let you let you take over. So this follows up on the first question in terms of high impact, and how do we measure high impact? Is it novelty? Is it clinical significance or application significance? So again, I'm going to hedge a bit, but this is subjective, by the way. The challenge, of course, is that whatever Danny and I say, we're not the ones reviewing your papers. One thing I do want to highlight at the outset that probably will apply to many of these questions here. Conferences and journals are reviewed by humans. So humans are in the loop, and they're not so far. Well, maybe we'll get there, but it's not reviewed by ChatGPT or DeepSeek or one of these things. As a result, you will get the entire range and diversity and spectrum of human opinion on how to interpret all of the things that the criteria that we're talking about today. So you'll fortunately and unfortunately experience potentially that diversity of opinions, and we can talk a little bit about how we try to manage that and adjudicate among opinions and so on and so forth. But again, in terms of this question about sort of like what's the increment of novelty, I hate to give a definition because anytime. By the way, practical lesson: don't ever give definitions because it's going to come back and bite you. By the way, so don't go back in your rebuttal and said, Jim and Danny said this, and this is what we did. And so just to qualify that. But having said that, I go back to my rule of thumb in terms of determining sort of like what quote's good enough. Again, I'd say a useful exercise is to ask yourself, what problem am I solving? And if this problem is new, if the problem is important, the problem can be a gap, it can be a limitation of existing sort of work for which there's a depth of literature already there. It could be a brand new problem that, for example, as Danny mentioned, that's unique to the RISE community or environment that nobody has addressed before. For me, a lot of that assessment comes from ultimately asking, why should I care, and why is it important? Why should people take a look at this? Danny, what do you think?
I think that's exactly right, actually. You've got to ask yourself the question and force yourself to articulate what is the novelty about this piece of work. And I think, it doesn't matter so much if that novelty is in technical innovation, sort of addressing an existing problem that others have already worked on, and you can show some advantage of, your technical novelty, or if it's taking relatively similar existing methods but applying them to a new problem. As long as you can articulate it, I think that means you're reasonably in the game for a MICCAI paper, or as we've said repeatedly, any other venue like this. If you're struggling to articulate that why your method is different to other ones and why it sort of addresses or why it addresses a different problem, then I think you need to be asking yourself the question, is this work really ready for me to submit it? I'm also not quantifying what the amount of novelty is, as you'll notice. It's very difficult to answer that specifically.
All right, Polka, was that good enough?
Yeah, I think so. That was good. Yeah, thanks, guys. Let's move on to the next question. Let's see which one to tackle next. Maybe we can take the second question on the list right now, which follows up on the first two. So this is regarding the evaluation of deep learning models in the context of specific medical applications, such as diseases like sickle cell, where annotated data is scarce and inter-laboratory variations are significant. So what are the committee's recommendations regarding such a model validation? Are there any specific guidelines on using multi-source data sets or standardizing benchmarks to ensure robustness and generalizability of model evaluation? So I guess they're asking what to do when the data that they're working on is scarce and how to evaluate on such a small data. What is the benchmarking criteria?
Can I take this one first this time?
Yep.
Danger of repeating ourselves here, but I think, the art of this is sort of matching up the validation and the experiments you do with the claims that you make. Ask yourself carefully, what is it that's new and interesting and novel about the method I'm presenting here? Is it designed to work with scarce data? Is it designed to just demonstrate a new capability? Is it designed to be generalizable across data that's coming from different labs? And once you've articulated the need and the aim, the motivation of the technique, that then frames the validation that you need to do. Because the point of the validation is to confirm the claims that you make at the start of the paper. And so I think, again, it's something that's impossible to quantify in general, because it's all relative to what you're trying to claim the point and purpose of the method is. As long as you can articulate that clearly, I think the validation, what should I do for validation, almost answers itself. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great, Danny. What I love about this particular question is that it's actually not so unique. Most of you folk out there who are actually working on real world applications, you're going to be in this small data sort of like regime. I love the fact that, if you're working on a real world application, on an application that your lab is focused on, that's the case. We do tend to have a lot of work that and it's going a little bit off tangent in terms of lots of techniques are often demonstrated on public data sets that are much larger and therefore seem to offer this opportunity to potentially do types of validation that are difficult to do with small data sets, or at least that they're benchmarks to aim for. I think the challenge with that is that you do tend to get a little lazy in terms of thinking about your work, because in that case, you're not really thinking about the downstream application. You're just thinking about hitting metrics. There's a AUC I'm trying to beat. There's something you quote trying to beat, as opposed to thinking about downstream what it is that you want to do, as Danny emphasized. What is it that you actually want to do that then informs the kinds of things that you want to show. This is a great one where, like I said, if you're working, as this person is, in sickle cell, that's obviously an interest in their lab, in their group, and many other folk have specific sort of like driving clinical or biological problems that motivate their work. For me, this is actually easy. at the end of the day, you have a specific downstream application. Your collaborator in the sickle cell domain actually has things that they want to do with the methodology that you're developing. So how do you convince your collaborators? How do you convince yourself that, that I've done my job, that whatever question that I'm trying to answer, whatever problem I'm trying to solve, in this case, in the sickle cell realm, that I'm doing it in a good enough way that I can follow on now with the downstream application, running some kind of a clinical research study, using my methods to answer questions about biomarkers, about whatever it is that I'm trying to measure, quantify, or study. So, rather than like I said, rather than aim for benchmarks or metrics, externally defined. In this case, I think that it's a lot more productive and a lot more effective by emphasizing what Danny mentioned, which is that what is it that you want to validate, what is it that you want to show, and in this case, you can if you hit benchmarks, but your sickle cell collaborator is not confident enough in your methods, then you might get a MICCAI paper. But I'll argue that making your collaborator, your sickle cell research collaborator happy would be more important than getting a MICCAI paper.
Yeah, that's great. I think let's move on to the next slide. I feel like now all the questions on the slide.
Sure, and we can flip back and forth too between the, yep.
But these are some great questions. So let's move on to the supplement, review, and rebuttal process, which is a handful. So this year, we know that a lot of changes have been made to the supplementary material in terms of you're only accepting, if I see the instructions correctly, video files, and there are no PDFs allowed or graphs or charts. So the first question is, given that the manuscript is already 8 pages, this year we don't have the option of a supplemental PDF, but only a video to support our main paper. This might lead to a reduction in the quality of accepted papers. What are PC's thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one, Danny, just so that I can take the hits for the PC team on this. This is a great question. This discussion on the supplementary materials was actually the first agenda item for the PC chair team, and we spent a great deal of time, an extensive amount of discussion on this particular topic. And the reason why I raised this as the first agenda item for the team to discuss and try to settle is that this is actually the most controversial and most time-consuming part for the organizing committee in terms of organizing the review process. Why is that? By the way, so a little bit of background, just to echo this point, as part of the 2024 organizing activity, I joined the 2024 PC team as an observer, and I observed, I noted that an inordinate amount of time, a significant fraction of the PC chair team had to do with reconciling and dealing with issues, challenges, and complaints that came up with the supplementary material portion of submissions and review. And many of these had to do with just technical questions that ultimately didn't impact the quality of the reviews or the scientific program. So it really hurt me, or at least it really frustrated me that so much time was being invested in this portion of the organizing activity that like I said, had minimal impact on the quality of the program itself. So we came to this decision. By the way, it's not unprecedented. So what we did was we returned to the original submission directions for MICCAI. So this is not new, by the way. So this is actually going back to the roots of MICCAI, where the supplementary material, we had that option for the CHI community, who at that time had content that could not be replicated in the paper itself, which was some kind of a document, PDF. And therefore, this option was provided for supplementary material, in this case, specifically video content. Okay. If folk who have previously submitted to MICCAI have carefully read the submission instructions, and these instructions have not changed, the submission instructions note that supplementary material is entirely optional, meaning that reviewers and ACs and program chairs are not obligated to review the supplementary material when they're actually assessing the content of a submission. This is a very, very confusing point. Okay, and this is where why organizing communities spend so much time adjudicating issues and complaints that come from this. So just as this quick question points out, you only have 8 pages and you don't have supplementary material. That, I want to emphasize, is the absolute point. The paper has to be self-contained, meaning that the reviewers, ACs, and PC, the entire organizing committee makes its decisions based solely on the content of the paper. So if there's any content, and this is what has happened in the past, a lot of people end up putting actually essential content, meaning content that's required to properly validate the paper, into the supplementary material. They then complain that it was there, and the reviewers unfairly complained or that was ignored. Well, that is exactly the point of this particular arrangement, and that's what it says in the instructions. Now, interestingly enough, you know, most authors actually, most members of the MICCAI community do wear 2 hats. They wear the author's hat, and when they wear the author's hat, many of them consider supplementary material to be essential. But when they put on the reviewer's hat, somehow now they're very cognizant of the instructions that the supplementary material is not obligated. They're not obligated to look at that material. And in fact, when we've run surveys of ACs and reviewers, the very, very large majority of them never look at the supplementary material. Okay. Given the fact that historically the supplementary material has never, is not required for review of the content itself, we just felt that we could remove this point of confusion, remove this point of pain for both the reviewer and the author community, and return to the roots of MICCAI. And truly sort of enforce the idea that the paper needs to be self-contained, and get your message across in 8 pages. It's good practice, by the way, to be able to hone your message so that you can present in 8 pages. But those were the thoughts of the, summarizing several weeks worth of discussion in terms of coming to this. By the way, there were other configurations considered. One was to actually extend the length of the papers from 8 to 10. Forget it. Rather than call it supplementary material, we just add 2 pages or add a page, make it 9 or 10 pages for the main paper. That was ultimately voted down because reviewers, when you put on your reviewer hat, it was felt that even extending to 9 or 10 pages would add too much burden to reviewer workload that that would make the recruiting process even more challenging. We need something like 2,000 reviewers for this year's meeting. That's a lot of reviewers, and that's even in the case when when we have reviewers, reviewing at least 5 papers each. So those were some of the factors, and I'm happy to elaborate on additional considerations that I didn't address. So Pulkit, hopefully that gives folks some idea of why we went this route. Now, of course, this was the prerogative of 2025 PC team. We'll see how it goes. We'll run a survey post meeting, maybe post submissions to get the temperature and pulse from the community to see if they felt this was a good move or not, and that'll inform sort of like how 2026 proceeds with this format. But that was the primary rationale in terms of this idea that supplementary material is, like I said, not essential to or not required in the review process. And if that was the case, then maybe we could just save a lot of grief and time and pain by having people focus on just writing the best 8-page paper that they can, and we'll see how it goes from there.
And just to reinforce a little bit of that, the suggestion in the question that it might lead to a reduction in the quality of accepted papers by not having these extended supplements. I would argue the opposite, actually, because I think it, by taking the uncertainty out of the equation, whether you should have a big extended supplement and whether the reviewer needs to look at it or not. People didn't know these things before, but now it's a much more level playing field. Everyone knows they have to get everything they need to in the 8 pages, and that's what the reviewer is going to see. I think it makes the review process much more consistent, and I think it makes the reviewers and the area chairs and the program chairs much more able to pick out the best, the better papers from those from the weaker ones, because they don't have that uncertainty as to whether interesting stuff is buried in the supplement. So I think overall it will improve the quality. I maybe just touch on the second question that appeared in the Q&A, which I think sort of relates to this a little bit. We'll come back to the other one about the figures, but obviously it's hard to squeeze stuff into 8 pages, but that argument stands whatever length, unless you just let any people write as much as they want, which is then becomes impossible to review and select, in any kind of discerning way. You always, any sort of scientific study worth its salt is always going to have more material than you can squeeze into the format that you submit to the conference. But that's the game, right? We all play that game, and the art of it is to get across the important things within the page limit, and that's what sells to the reviewers, and everyone's in the same boat. We all have the same constraints, so it's fair. And I think we've got enough existence proofs that it's possible to get across a good study in 8 pages. There's some brilliant MICCAI papers out there that fit in exactly that length. It's been done time and time again, so it is possible. It requires some effort, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, and this, of course, at the end of the day, now keep in mind, these constraints are not MICCAI specific. You have 8 pages here. I forget now, or actually it'll depend in terms of like scheduling and so forth. But keep in mind, when you're giving an oral presentation at work, you don't have infinite amount of time to present your ideas. Again, you have a very limited amount of time, and the whole point is that it's felt like this time is enough for you to get the main points across. And it's this whole idea. It's the same idea of having this sort of restriction that, in a way, I think it's a very practical way to help force you to think about what's most important about this work, and how you want to communicate it. Now, the fair thing, of course, is that again, this is the kind of thing that, especially when I remind junior folk, is they tend to forget that they wear many hats when they're part of the community. And just as you're faced with these challenges when you're authoring the work, you know, when you're sitting on the other side of the table and you put your reviewer hat on, just remember that, you know, you're also an author, and give some grace and keep in mind sort of like if the kinds of things that we often get from reviewers, like, you know, why didn't you run that ablation study? You know, why didn't you run these sort of things, and why isn't it in this paper? Yes, our challenge certainly on the organizing side is to then remind the reviewers that, look, there's 8 pages here. Be mindful in terms of the kind of additional content that you're asking for. What's most significant in terms of helping you to evaluate this content is not that it's not okay to ask for things, but just make sure that what you're asking for is truly important in terms of being able to make a decision, to make a proper evaluation. So you're right. I mean, in terms of the organizing committee, in terms of the PC team making decisions this time around, it is going to fall on our shoulders to ensure that the reviewers and ACs who now have the job of reviewing the papers are reminded of the fact that you know, it's 8 pages here. So whatever challenges that you have, just know that when you're reviewing a paper, those authors face those same challenges. So please don't make the types of requests that frustrate, exasperate yourself as an author if you were to get that request. So do unto others what you'd like them to do unto you. So as a reviewer, don't write things and request things and make judgments that you don't want to see on reviews of your own work.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Danny. Yeah, I like Jim's and way that you're explaining that you have to put your reviewer hat on and author hat on at the same time and see how would you feel if someone would give that particular review on your paper, and then you should not do the same thing to others. And it also brings up an important point of science communication in general, how to fit the maximum amount of information in the given space that you have, which also applies not only to MICCAI, but other conferences and journal submissions as well. Maybe one follow-up question on this, which is actually on the next slide as well, would be, so what is okay in the video? We know that like some kind of proof of concept, surgical demonstration, or things like that are acceptable. But there is also this fear where some folks might abuse what to put on the video, and they might just put tables or text or figures and submit that as a video format. So are there any checks for that in place?
Yeah, so you know, it's going to be self-defeating. You know, trying to game the system in that way is not going to help you at all. But ultimately, I do want to just, you know, reemphasize that even the videos are not, you know, reviewers and ACs are not required to look at the supplementary material. And in this case, it's videos. So it might be the case that you can stick in tables and charts and so on and so forth. But the likelihood of anybody actually even looking at that video, because in your case, if you're doing that and there's no obvious reason why you should be submitting a video as part of your supplementary material, I would imagine that nobody would even look at it. So I don't think that we're even going to try to police this because it's just not going to help you. So please don't, you know, please don't waste your time. You know, you don't have a lot of time. It's so with a finite amount of time that you have, you know, just focus on what we've talked about. You know, ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing. When you're writing it down and articulating it, you know, put on your reviewer hat. So like, what would reviewers want to hear? You know, what would the community want to hear, as opposed to like what you're telling yourself. And you know, and focus on putting together the best presentation of those ideas, as opposed to figuring out how to game the system. Like I said, as Danny mentioned, these rules apply to everybody. We're all in the same boat. So hopefully there's some comfort that you can derive from the fact that we're all, like I said, we're all in the same boat.
Maybe one take on this. I mean, it's more of a more general statement, I think, about supplementary material versus main body of paper, but I think that applies to the videos here. You know, but my advice to my students is often, you know, that basically you assume that reviewers will not look at it, and I think start from that position.
Yep.
So what's the point of supplementary material at all? I think it's generally designed for not for the reviewers at all. It's designed for the super interested reader who really wants to see extra stuff. And this is not the reader that reviews the paper and decides whether the paper's accepted. This is a reader, once the paper is accepted, you know, maybe they're starting their PhD afresh in 2 years from now, and they, you know, they're given your paper by their supervisor and asked to reproduce it before going off in a different direction. You know, they might need to know some real extra information that the reviewer doesn't need to know at all to make a judgment on the paper. But yeah, someone who's wanting to re-implement or really understand deeply what you've done, that's where the supplementary material goes.
Yep. And we certainly do encourage folk that, I mean, MICCAI has certainly evolved into, in many ways, as in other communities, where it has become sort of a flagship forum, and publications that appear in this forum are often sort of like the only instance of a presentation of a work. But we do encourage follow-on presentations of this work, as in particular in the format of journals, where you then have the opportunity to elaborate. And so, you know, maybe the silver lining is that, you know, all that stuff that you'd like to jam in a supplementary material, now you have content for the journal version of your paper, and or for presentation at other venues. All right, Puka, what else can we?
Let's take the first question from chat and then move on to the review and rebuttal phases.
Okay.
So the question pertains to, what's the figure question in the first page? Let's see. So I think the last question here, given that the page limit is 8 pages, adding a lot of figures and tables takes quite some space. Would you recommend something more visual and easy to understand, or a deeper written analysis?
Danny, you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah.
I think we're going to be repeating a lot of what we're talking about.
Yeah, we are. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
this is always an optimization problem in its own right, isn't it? But, you know, I think what is the objective function of that optimization? It's getting across to the reviewer and the reader what you've done, why it's important, you know, that it works, and all the key validation things. And, you know, I think that's really what guides the choice of what figures go in, and how you balance figure versus text. You know, think about what is the takeaway message that you want the reader to go away with, and how do I convey that information in the most clear and efficient way. It's not a direct answer, I'm afraid, but that's my best shot.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't have much more to add to that. It's really about the presentation, the messaging. It's the same thing, by the way, when I'm sure you've been to all of you have been to conferences, and you've listened to oral presentations as well as poster presentations, but the oral presentations, and you know, you go to a session with 5 different talks in it, and there'll be 5 different presentation styles, and that's appropriate, because you know, they've one thing is that it would be terribly boring if all 5 presenters presented in an identical format, right? Which is kind of like what this question is asking for. The whole point is that, you know, each of the 5 presenters had a different message to convey, and they had optimized their objective function in terms of like how they wanted to convey that message. And it's totally your prerogative to do that. And I'm sure that you've sat through you know, sessions where it was quite miserable to sit through because the content itself might not have been boring, but the presentation itself was not the best. Might have even been confusing. So oftentimes, you know, that's really challenging, where you actually do disservice to the work because you didn't present it well. So this is really an important question, and this is one where you know, having your colleagues and your peers, your mentors, or other folk that you work with help proofread your work is really useful. They may say that this figure doesn't help me at all. In fact, I find it confusing, and you're better off taking it out. This table doesn't add additional information, or they might say that, hey, maybe you should put a figure in here because this might be easier to convey than the text that you have in here. The text is really hard to follow, but a picture would really be useful. So it's hard to quantify this. It's hard to have guidelines. I think at the end of the day, probably the best thing that you can do for yourself, especially as junior folk, but even as more senior folk like ourselves, we really value having the feedback. You know, if you're having a hard time putting on a review hat or a reader hat, well, then actually give it to somebody else and have them take a quick look at it. They don't even need to do a deep read. If it's confusing to them in the first 10 minutes, then you're already sort of like, okay, I got more work to do. If they can't get the main message in 10 minutes, then you know, there's some improvement that can be made. But yeah, so my best advice here is have your peers look at it. Have your you know, fellow students, have your fellow junior investigators, have your fellow senior investigators look, you know, take a quick look.
One short thing to add is that, you know, all that said, you know, it depends on what you're trying to say, which is absolutely true. But I think if you go and look at the top rated, you know, the papers that led to oral presentations over the last few years, they're reasonably consistent, I would say, in terms of sort of balance of content between figures, tables, and text. You know, I mean, they do vary, obviously, but it's not like some of them are all text and some of them are all figures, you know. So I think just having you know, if you haven't submitted to MICCAI before, it is worth taking the time to just have a, you know, fairly quick look through you know, a fair set of papers that were in the oral sessions, because those will generally be the ones that were rated highly, and you'll get a sense of, you know, what people usually do for that kind of balance.
I think, yeah, Daniel, I think you wrapped up that question very well. So let's move on. So it's almost at the hour. We have around 15 minutes to go. So let's move on to a couple of questions regarding the review and the rebuttal phase. Let's see. So we can combine the second and the third question here. And so since there is a limited number of words, is it okay to focus on the most important points raised by the reviewer, or should we reply to all the points? Here I'm hoping that this can lead to a nice discussion on how to write a good discussion, as in when a reviewer asks for different experiments to be done, and given the format has changed for rebuttal since last year, if I'm correct, are there any more changes to the rebuttal process this year? And how are the authors supposed to answer the question whether reviewers are asking for more experiments, even though the instructions say that don't ask for more experiments? So yeah, that's the kind of second and the third question combined together.
All right, Danny, I'll if you don't mind, I'll defer to you in terms of just, in general sort of tips about writing rebuttals and responses. But I can talk a little about the process itself. So yes, again, because humans are massively in the loop in this process. Again, I'd love for folk who are wearing the reviewer hat to be sensitive to what they're requesting. But yeah, it is the job of the ACs, of the area chairs. So excuse me, by the way, when I realize I've been using acronyms and I haven't mentioned what they mean. So previously, if I mentioned ACs, I'm speaking about the area chairs, and they have the responsibility of managing the reviewers. So it is the job of the area chairs to make sure that the reviewers abide by the guidelines that they're provided in terms of carrying out their tasks and responsibilities. And then it's a job of the PCs to remind the ACs, the program chairs to remind the ACs that what the rules are as well, because sometimes they ask for things that they forget, and they ask for things that they really shouldn't be asking for. Again, the burden does fall on the authors that your paper is supposed to be self-contained and fixed. So it's not a work in progress. It's not this idea that it's not a journal paper, for example, where the final paper is actually quite different can potentially be quite different from the original submission. Conferences are different. Conference papers are, what you submit is it's supposed to be a snapshot of your work at that time. It's not the final piece. It's a snapshot. And so reviewers do need to be reminded of that. And we try hard to do it. But keep that in mind. Again, when you're writing your work, just think about sort of like what reviewers, how they might interpret what you're presenting, what they might ask for, and how somebody reading this would take this in. And sometimes you might be able to preempt these questions by noting in the discussion, that this is a snapshot and what's missing and so on and so forth. And you can help yourself in that regard in terms of anticipating some of the issues that might arise or that a reader might bring up and address those, like I said, in the paper itself. Danny, I'd love to hear what you recommend people do in terms of in terms of rebuttals in general.
Yeah. So I mean, first of all, I would say absolutely focus on the important points. In direct answer to that question, but in the format of typical conference responses where you have limited space, I would not feel the need to reply to every tiny little correct this typo here and there type statement in the reviews. Absolutely focus on the key points. The reviewers, the area chairs will be looking for your reaction to the key points that the reviewers raise, which decide the key decision that they have to make. And that is not going to be about typos and and sort of formatting of tables and things like that. I think you can just take those things and say, yes, I'll do all of that stuff. So yeah, look for the key criticisms and focus on those. Other things I would say is, don't forget to point out the positives. And often it's worth using a bit of bandwidth that you have to pull those things together and make sure that you sort of remind the area chair, this is someone who's going to be looking through stacks and stacks and stacks of these rebuttals. Point out to them, rather than diving straight into dealing with criticisms, point out that actually the reviewers loved this paper and they highlighted these really important things about it. It is worth taking a little bit of time to remind them of that. I guess sort of specifically on that point about reviewers asking for more experiments. So it's true, as Jim says, in the conference format that they shouldn't really be doing that. And the way I take that when a reviewer suggests that is not like, It's not, I want you to add this experiment for the camera ready. This is more feedback on the paper as it stands. This paper would be much stronger if it had this additional experiment in it. It's not saying do it and we'll accept it. And so I think there's two ways that you can take that. They might be right. And if so, you can take that on the chin, and it gives you some useful feedback for future versions of that paper. It may well be that despite them being right, you can still argue that this was not a high priority experiment, and that with the limited space, you prioritized other results because they were more important for getting your message across, or that some of the experiments that you do show kind of somehow answer the question that experiment would have answered anyway. The other potential, the other possibility is that they're wrong and you don't agree that experiment would have been useful. And I think then the rebuttal gives you a chance to argue back and say, well, this is why we've presented this paper without that particular experiment. It's not relevant to the claims that we're trying to make, for example. Yeah, I guess that's my take on rebuttals.
Yeah, that's really important to point out that you don't have to defer to the reviewers. They don't they aren't necessarily right or correct or and lots of times that the frustrating thing is that they've actually misread your paper, and so it might be more of a clarification than, say, providing an additional experiment. And so as Danny pointed out, not yeah, the clarification is more important than necessarily directly responding and giving sort of like a review of what they're asking for.
Yeah, maybe we can take, let's see on the screen. I think one last question from the slide, which would probably sum up the process here. So let's say we are done with the rebuttal phase, and this is the fourth question on the slide. So looks like there is noise in the review process, both at the reviewer stage and the area chair stage. And it is common for an area chair to look at the ratings of the reviewers and then decide the final score by not going through all the rebuttals. In such a case, will there be an appeal process? Is there any mechanism to do any appeal if the author feels like both the reviewer and the area chair have overlooked some criteria which they feel is reasonable to appeal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, at any meetings of this size, there are going to be a lot of disappointed authors who don't have their work accepted into the meeting, and a number of them will have legitimate gripes, and in terms of the decision. Hopefully, when you do get if you do unfortunately receive a rejection decision, there will be an explanation provided as part of that notification, so hopefully that would be helpful. On the other hand, if folk don't feel that the explanation is adequate, there isn't exactly a formal appeal process. But folk have no problems reaching out to the program chairs on their own and alerting us to their dissatisfaction. Those don't immediately get triaged to the junk folder on our email clients. They will be documented, and we will actually address each of these. So this is a great question. So maybe we will try to clarify sort of a quote appeal process. But appeals tend to be The success of appeals, as one might imagine, is pretty rare, given the volume of submissions that are provided. Keep in mind that your paper will have been reviewed by at least 3 reviewers, and there'll be 3 area chairs who would actually also look at the reviews. And then on top of that, the program chair team will then look at the decisions of the 3 area chairs. And the area chairs are ideally more experienced than the reviewers. So it has, it would be something that have gone through like 3 levels of checks. So it would have to be fairly egregious in terms of something was, something completely got missed through those levels of checks. But if it's an issue where, folk can fairly have sort of like differences of opinion, then I would advise folk that, I wouldn't discourage you from not appealing, but the chances of your success would be fairly limited in that instance where, that folk arriving at an opinion, a decision different than what you'd like is justifiable, then that's something that authors should keep in mind.
I think that answers that question pretty well. Let's try to wrap up the session. We're almost at the end of the hour. So we can take a couple of questions from the Q&A, and then there are some logistic questions which we can combine as well, which also you have answered before. So from the Q&A, one question is, this is regarding the template in LaTeX. Since we're expected not to change anything, and that's why we have the LaTeX format, the file. Can we resize the table to make it smaller?
So here's where I don't want to say anything, because I'd hate for you to say that, Jim said I could resize the table and that'd be okay. So I am in the interest of not getting people upset. I'm not gonna. I would say follow the guidelines, and if I'll just say that again, putting on your reviewer hat. It's quite obvious. It's quite obvious when somebody's been abusive of guidelines, and if a paper is actually difficult to read because of changes that have been made, I can guarantee you that it will be brought up by reviewers and ACs. On the other hand, if you've made subtle changes, to fit in a table, because otherwise the formatting gets wonked out and stuff like that, but it doesn't interfere with, the presentation of the content, I expect that you're not going to find a reviewer or an AC now digging into your source code or requesting, a copy of the content just to monitor and check those things. We're not looking. We're not referees looking out to throw red cards at everybody. I mean, the job is hard enough in itself. I think the thing that folks should just keep in mind is that reviewing is a lot of work, and being mindful when you're putting to your content. Be friendly to reviewers, be friendly to readers, make their job easier. This is the other thing of like keeping things to 8 pages. If you can explain something in 8 pages as opposed to in 20. Boy, you've saved the reviewer a lot of time in terms of like just getting at the core of the message. So I think the guidance here would be the same in terms of anything related to formatting and so on and so forth. I'm not going to endorse anything because it'll just get you and me into trouble. And yeah, so just keep that in mind. Just focus on ensuring that the presentation is as clear as possible, and that includes sort of like for the eyeballs. So something that's easy to consume is going to be helpful.
My brief take on this: you definitely follow the guidelines, and if uncertain about doing something weird like strange resizing things in LaTeX, don't do it. It's just not worth it. Saving an extra line here or there. You can do that through text editing and succinctness,
Exactly.
which the reviewers will actually appreciate. So keep it simple.
We are almost.
Yeah, so I just want to quickly add, that there are a lot of folk who, there is often still the questions about whether I can use large language models in terms of paper preparation and so on and so forth. So the rules are pretty clear that yes, you're allowed to use it to help edit your content, but not to generate content. So utilize resources like that. If give your 10-page text and have ChatGPT reduce it to 8 pages or whatever. Just you use the technologies that's available to you to make things more concise. If you like me, I also write very verbosely. So again, having colleagues and others proofread and help edit is definitely the same advice I'd give as Danny. Rather than shrinking things, you could probably take some text and reduce it so that everything fits.
Let's take one last question on the screen, the last one, and then just wrap it up. So this is a specific question from a mentee in the MICCAI 2025 Young Researcher Excellence Training Program who is preparing a submission. Their question is there a maximum number of papers that they could submit? And do they have to list their mentor as the corresponding author since they are collaborating online and they have provided feedback? And is it acceptable for their name to be listed as second author on one of the submissions? So I think this is regarding the Young Researcher Excellence Training Program.
Okay, so I don't understand the last question in terms of acceptable by being named as a second author, but I guess maybe just a general comment here, and this doesn't just apply to MICCAI, it applies to any sort of publication that one puts together. In terms of authorship, hopefully you've been told or informed or instructed or taking workshops where clarifying authorship, including order of authors and who should be part of the authorship. That's an important point of discussion that you should have ideally in advance of actually preparing a manuscript. These shouldn't, hopefully these aren't questions that you're trying to deal with after the fact, because it can lead to lots of very complicated things and things that can sometimes actually get you into real trouble. And so you just want to avoid all of that stuff by taking care of all of that in advance as much as possible. It could be that over the course of actually preparing a manuscript, additional authors come on board, and maybe some authors may be dropped off. But this should be something that, like I said, ideally dealt with in advance and should be an active thing to be worked out. Folks should never be surprised. You should never submit something that has authors on it that they weren't aware that they were authors, or potentially that authors were left off that potentially should have been on. So in this question, some of these questions, a couple of these questions here seems like you can get the appropriate answer by directly engaging the individuals who are involved. Danny, do you want to add your thoughts to this?
I think that, that really says it all. I think the mentor-mentee relationship, I don't think necessarily means that, that they have to be co-author. Although often it may well be that means they've had that input into the work that means that they could be, but the decision on that is really around the standard rules of authorship, and same applies to the ordering. I don't think the fact that relationship exists necessarily dictates that at all.
Right, but at a minimum, you should at least have the discussion with the mentor. And again, no surprises. This is a case where the surprise might not be a good thing, or you might not get the response that you actually anticipated. And so you don't want to surprise. There was a specific question about number of papers that one is allowed to submit. There is technically no maximum, so you can submit as many papers as you'd like.
I think we are out of time, so it's good. I think we covered a lot of questions, and we were able to answer a lot of Q&A as well. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Daniel, a lot for taking time. I think this was a great session, a lot of nice questions as well. And this recording will be up on YouTube sometime soon, so those who couldn't attend will have a chance to look at the recording. Is there any way that folks could contact you, or just through your email, if they have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, absolutely, Polka. So first, thanks again. Thank you so much for organizing this session. It was a lot of fun for me. I'll let Danny speak for himself, but this was really great opportunity for us to publicize the upcoming meeting and to encourage folk to submit. And thanks for everybody for their questions and being mindful of things that might trip up your submissions and addressing them up front. But yes, Polka, yes, an hour and a half, I'm sure wasn't enough to address a lot of the questions that folk have. So please feel free to reach out both to the submission platform manager, that's Kitty Wong, as well as to the PC chair team. So there's a general address that you'll see on the website that if you were to send messages, that actually gets out to the entire PC chair team. So any one of us can address your questions. Don't be shy to send questions. There's no such thing as a dumb question or whatever. So I love the fact that there were lots of questions presented today. I know that we didn't get to all of them. So if folk really had submitted a question and really would like to get an answer, please feel free to forward it on to the PC chair email address.
Yeah, just add my own thanks for organizing. Thanks to everyone for attending. It's been really good fun. It's reminded me a lot of the questions that my students will be asking me over the next week or so as well. So now I've got the answers much more ready in my mind. Yeah, and as Jim says, yeah, definitely, if there's more questions, do feel free to follow up. But I, again, would use the PC chair's email, because then there's several people looking at it rather than just waiting for one individual. So.
Exactly. Best of luck to all of you. Yeah. I hope we actually see you in South Korea and we get to meet you in person. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Esther. And also special thanks to Diana for putting up the webinar and sending out all the announcements in time.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks, Esther. Thanks.